No one understood why the millionaire chose to marry the most humble woman in town. The whispers started the moment Maxwell Richmond walked into Joe's Diner on Main Street in Millbrook, Connecticut. Not because anyone recognized him as the CEO of Richmond Technologies. He'd carefully cultivated his privacy despite his $2.8 billion net worth, but because he was wearing a custom Tom Ford suit in a place where the daily special cost $7.99. "Table for one?" asked Andrea Harrison, clutching a coffee pot in one hand and a stack of menus in the other. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, wisps escaping around her face after 8 hours on her feet. She didn't look up as she spoke, too busy mentally calculating if she'd make enough in tips today to cover both her grandmother's medication and this month's utilities. "Actually," Maxwell said, his voice gentle in a way that made her finally meet his gaze, "I was hoping to speak with the owner about a business proposition." Andrea's green eyes flickered with something between amusement and exhaustion. "You're looking at her." She gestured to an empty booth. "Give me 2 minutes to refill my regulars, and I'm all ears." Maxwell settled into the cracked vinyl booth, watching as Andrea moved efficiently between tables. There was something compelling about her presence. The way she remembered every regular's order, how she slipped an extra piece of pie to the elderly man in the corner who always counted his pennies, the genuine warmth in her smile despite the evident fatigue in her shoulders. He'd done his research before coming here. Andrea Harrison, 28, had inherited Joe's Diner from her grandfather 3 years ago. Since then, she'd worked 18-hour days to keep the place afloat while simultaneously caring for her grandmother with advancing dementia. The diner was more than just a business to the community. It was where people came when they couldn't afford a hot meal anywhere else, knowing Andrea would find a way to feed them. "So," Andrea said, sliding into the booth across from him, "what brings a man in a suit worth more than my monthly revenue to my humble establishment?" "I'd like to buy the diner," Maxwell said directly, studying her reaction. Andrea's laugh was immediate and genuine. "Sorry, but it's not for sale." "Is that all?" "Because I've got customers waiting. I'm prepared to offer 5 times its market value." The smile faded from Andrea's face. "Mr. Richmond?" "Maxwell Richmond." She showed no recognition at the name, which only intrigued him more. "Mr. Richmond, this diner isn't just a business. It's my grandfather's legacy. It's where my grandmother met my grandfather 50 years ago. It's where half this town can afford to eat. I appreciate your offer, but some things aren't for sale." Maxwell leaned forward, his blue eyes intent. "What if I told you I want to preserve it exactly as it is? Keep all the staff, maintain the prices, but inject enough capital to renovate the kitchen, fix the leaking roof, and ensure its sustainability for generations to come?" Andrea's hands, calloused from years of carrying hot plates and scrubbing tables, clenched around her coffee pot. "Why would you do that? What's in it for you?" "Because I've been watching this place for weeks. I've seen how you run it, how you treat people, how you've created something rare in this world. A place where everyone feels welcome regardless of what's in their wallet." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "And because I'd like to take you to dinner." The coffee pot clattered against the table as Andrea set it down too hard. "Excuse me? Dinner? Just dinner? No strings attached to the business proposition either way." Andrea studied him with the kind of penetrating gaze that made Maxwell feel more exposed than he had in any boardroom. "You want to buy my diner? And date me? Are you having some kind of billionaire midlife crisis?" "I'm 34, so that would be premature," Maxwell said with a slight smile. "And no, this isn't a crisis. It's recognition of something genuine in a world where I'm constantly surrounded by artifice." The dinner rush was picking up, the bell above the door chiming as more customers walked in. Andrea stood, straightening her apron. "I don't mix business with pleasure, Mr. Richmond, and I don't date customers, especially not ones who think they can buy their way into my life." "Then let me earn my way in," Maxwell said, standing as well. "I'll come back tomorrow as a regular customer. No business talk, no proposals, just a man ordering the daily special and getting to know his waitress." For the first time, a hint of a real smile played at the corners of Andrea's mouth. "The special tomorrow is meatloaf. Still interested?" "More than ever." As Maxwell walked out of the diner, He could feel the weight of curious stares from the other patrons. He knew what they must be thinking. What would a man like him want with a small-town diner owner who wore second-hand clothes and worked until her feet ached? But they hadn't seen what he had. The quiet strength, the unwavering integrity, the rare ability to make everyone around her feel valued. In his world of corporate takeovers and million-dollar deals, Maxwell had learned to recognize true worth. And Andrea Harrison, with her messy bun and coffee-stained apron, was the most valuable person he'd encountered in years. He climbed into his Tesla, parked discreetly around the corner, already looking forward to tomorrow's meatloaf. For the first time in his life, Maxwell Richmond was prepared to work for something money couldn't buy. The trust of a woman who saw wealth as the least interesting thing about a person. Little did he know, his pursuit of Andrea Harrison would soon become the talk of not just Millbrook, but the entire state of Connecticut, challenging everything both of them thought they knew about love, worth, and the true meaning of wealth. Andrea's hands trembled slightly as she counted out the day's receipts long after closing time. The late October wind rattled the diner's windows, and she pulled her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The encounter with Maxwell Richmond had left her more shaken than she cared to admit. "You're not seriously thinking of saying no to that offer, are you?" Margie Chen, her best friend and the diner's cook for the past 5 years, was wiping down the grill for the third time. A sure sign she was worried. "Which offer?" Andrea asked dryly. "The business one or the personal one?" "Both." Margie threw her cleaning rag into the sink. "Look, I know you're proud, but that roof isn't going to fix itself. And when was the last time you went on a date?" Andrea thought about the stack of bills waiting at home, about her grandmother's increasing medical expenses, about the way she'd had to cut her own hours at the nursing facility to keep the diner running. "It's not about pride, Marge. It's about integrity. My grandfather built this place from nothing. He gave people second chances, jobs when nobody else would hire them. I won't let it become some rich man's hobby." "Didn't sound like that's what he wanted," Margie pointed out. "He said he wanted to preserve it." "Men like Maxwell Richmond don't get where they are by preserving things," Andrea replied, though a small voice in her head reminded her of the genuine interest she'd seen in his eyes. "They acquire, reshape, and move on." The bell above the door chimed, making both women jump. Andrea's heart skipped before she realized it was just her younger brother Ryan, home from his shift at the fire station. "You ladies talking about your mysterious suit?" Ryan grinned, helping himself to a leftover muffin. "Because the whole town already is. Mrs. Peterson called the station just to tell me about it." Andrea groaned. In a town of 12,000 people, news traveled faster than the morning coffee rush. "Don't you start too." "Hey, I'm just saying," Ryan raised his hands in surrender. "When a billionaire tech CEO shows up at your diner, what?" Andrea's head snapped up. "How do you know who he is?" Ryan pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of Maxwell Richmond accepting some innovation award. "Took me about 30 seconds to find him online." "Richmond Technologies?" "The guy's practically revolutionized renewable energy storage. Pretty sure his latest patent could power all of Millbrook for a year on solar alone." Andrea sank into a booth, her mind racing. She'd assumed he was just another wealthy businessman, maybe someone looking to expand their portfolio into small-town real estate. But this was different. "Why wouldn't he say anything?" she wondered aloud. "Maybe because he wanted you to treat him like a regular person," Margie suggested softly. "Which you did, by the way. Probably the first time in years someone's told him no without checking his net worth first." The truth of that statement hit Andrea hard. She thought about how he'd waited patiently while she served other customers, how he'd looked her in the eye instead of down at her, how he hadn't thrown around his name or credentials. Her phone buzzed with a text from the nursing home where her grandmother lived. Her heart sank as she read it. Another episode. Another night of confusion and distress. She needed to go, but she also needed to finish the books, prep for tomorrow's inventory delivery, and somehow figure out how to make payroll this month. "Go," Margie said, reading her expression. "I'll finish up here." "I'll drive you," Ryan offered, already grabbing his keys. Outside, the night had turned cold enough to see their breath. As they walked to Ryan's truck, Andrea caught sight of a figure across the street. Maxwell Richmond, standing in the shadows of the town's old bookstore, on his phone. He looked different now, his suit jacket off, his shoulders tense as he argued with someone on the other end of the line. "Your board unanimously approved the funding," he was saying, his voice carrying in the quiet night air. "The research is solid, the technology works. We can't delay the rollout just because. No, listen to me. These communities need affordable clean energy now, not when it's most profitable for our shareholders." Andrea found herself stopping to listen, something in his tone catching her attention. This wasn't the smooth businessman from earlier. This was someone fighting for something he believed in. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked, following her gaze. "I don't know," Andrea admitted. For the first time since Maxwell Richmond walked into her diner, she felt a flicker of something dangerous. Curiosity. The drive to Pine Valley Care Center was quiet, Andrea lost in thought. She thought about Maxwell's words about recognizing something genuine, about how he'd noticed the way she ran the diner, the small things she did for her customers. How many people actually saw that? Her grandmother was agitated when they arrived, convinced it was 1962 and she needed to get to work at the diner. It took 2 hours to calm her down, to convince her that everything was okay, that the diner was safe. By the time Andrea got home to her small apartment above the local hardware store, it was past midnight. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, pulling out the diner's books once again. The numbers hadn't changed. They were still in the red, still barely hanging on. But for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to not carry this burden alone, to have the resources to really help people, to expand what her grandfather had built instead of just struggling to preserve it. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "The meatloaf better live up to the hype." Imar, despite herself, Andrea smiled. Then she frowned, typing back, "How did you get this number?" The response came quickly. "I have my ways. But if it helps, I had to promise Mrs. Chun your favorite coffee order for a week." "Margie?" "Of course." Andrea made a mental note to have a serious talk with her friend about boundaries. But as she got ready for bed, she found herself wondering what coffee order Maxwell thought was her favorite and looking forward to proving him wrong. She fell asleep thinking about integrity, about change, about the look in Maxwell Richmond's eyes when he talked about genuine things in an artificial world. Tomorrow's meatloaf, she decided, would be the best she'd ever made. Not for him, she told herself firmly. For the diner, for her grandfather's legacy. But as she drifted off, she couldn't quite convince herself that was the whole truth. Maxwell arrived at Joe's diner precisely at 2:47 p.m. When he'd observed the lunch rush typically wound down. He traded his usual suit for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, though he suspected the soft gray material still cost more than most of the diner's weekly revenue. The first thing he noticed was Andrea's absence. The second was the worried looks being exchanged between Margie and a teenage waitress he hadn't seen before. "She's at the nursing home again," Margie said before he could ask, sliding him a menu he didn't need. "Her grandmother had a bad fall this morning. Coffee?" Maxwell's chest tightened. He'd read about Gloria Harrison's declining health in his initial research, but clinical terms like progressive dementia hadn't captured the human toll. "How often does this happen?" "Too often." Margie's expression softened as she studied him. "You really did your homework on this place, didn't you? But you missed the most important part." "Which is?" "Andrea's not just running a diner. She's running a community center, a food bank, in a safe haven." Margie gestured around the nearly empty restaurant. "See that teenager in the corner? Andrea lets her study here because her home life is complicated. The old man by the window? His wife died last year. He comes in every day because we're the only ones who remember how he likes his eggs. The construction workers who were here at lunch? She feeds them at cost because she knows they're working on the struggling development project across town." Maxwell took this in, adding another layer to his understanding of Andrea Harrison. "And she does all this while caring for her grandmother? And working part-time at the nursing home to help cover the bills." Margie's voice held a challenge. "Still interested in that meatloaf?" Before Maxwell could respond, the bell chimed and Andrea walked in. She looked exhausted, her clothes slightly rumpled, but her smile for the studying teenager never wavered as she passed. When she spotted Maxwell, she paused, something flickering across her face too quickly to read. "You're late for meatloaf," she said, approaching his table. kitchen closed an hour ago. I was hoping we could talk instead. I'm working. Maxwell gestured at the nearly empty diner. I'll wait. And he did. For the next 2 hours, he watched Andrea move through her world. He saw how she helped the teenage girl with her algebra homework between serving coffee refills. How she sat with the widower for exactly 7 minutes, the same amount of time she used to spend chatting with his wife. How she handled a phone call from a supplier with firm grace when they tried to raise prices on her again. At 5:15, she finally slid into the booth across from him, looking wary but less defensive than yesterday. All right, Mr. Richmond, you've made your point about being persistent. What do you really want? First, I want you to call me Max. Second, he pulled out his tablet, opening a document. I want you to look at this proposal. It's not about buying the diner anymore. It's about partnership. Andrea's eyes narrowed, but she took the tablet. As she read, her expression shifted from skepticism to confusion. This isn't just about the diner. No, Maxwell agreed quietly. It's about creating a sustainable model for community support. The diner would be the centerpiece, but we'd expand a proper food bank, a scholarship program for local students, subsidized meals for families in need, all under your management with complete autonomy in day-to-day operations. Why? Because I build things, Andrea. Clean energy systems, sustainable technology, but they're all just tools. What you've built here, this is what those tools are for. Creating real change, supporting real communities. He leaned forward. And because I want to know how you take your coffee, a smile tugged at her lips despite herself. Black, 2 sugars. Margie got it wrong. I know. I've been watching you drink it for 3 weeks. Andrea's head snapped up. 3 weeks? I came in every morning at 6:30, sat at the counter. You never noticed me because you were too busy making sure everyone else was taken care of. Maxwell's voice softened. That's when I knew I wanted to know you. Not just the diner owner, not just the caregiver. You can't buy that knowledge, Andrea said, but her voice had lost its edge. I know. That's why I'm still here, eating mediocre meatloaf and waiting for you to give me a chance. The meatloaf is excellent. I wouldn't know. Someone wouldn't serve me any. For the first time, Andrea laughed, a real laugh that transformed her entire face. Fine, come back tomorrow at noon. I'll save you a plate. She stood up, adding more quietly, and I'll think about the proposal. That's all I'm asking for. Maxwell stood as well, then hesitated. How's your grandmother? The laughter faded from Andrea's eyes. They want to move her to a memory care unit. A better facility, more specialized care. But the cost? She shook her head. I'll figure something out. I always do. Andrea. Maxwell started, but she held up a hand. Don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't. I won't trade the diner's future for my grandmother's care. That's not who I am. I know exactly who you are, Maxwell said softly. That's why I'm here. He left her standing there, the proposal still open on his tablet. As he walked to his car, he pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. Lisa, I need you to look into Pine Valley Care Center. Everything, financials, patient care ratings, staff turnover, and then find me the best memory care facilities within 50 miles of Millbrook. He paused, watching through the diner window as Andrea helped the teenage girl pack up her books. No, this isn't about the Renewable Energy Initiative. This is personal. Inside the diner, Andrea picked up the tablet again, reading through the proposal one more time. Her hand trembled slightly as she saw the numbers, the possibilities, the chance to do everything she dreamed of, but never had the resources to accomplish. He's different, Margie said quietly from behind her. Maybe, Andrea admitted. What, different enough? As if in answer, her phone buzzed with another text from Maxwell. For the record, the coffee was wrong on purpose. I wanted to give you the satisfaction of correcting me. Despite everything, her grandmother's fall, the stack of bills at home, the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Andrea smiled. Different enough? Maybe it was time to find out. The headline in the Hartford Courant hit Millbrook like a thunderbolt. Tech billionaire Maxwell Richmond's secret small-town romance. Below it was a grainy photo of Maxwell walking into Joe's diner, followed by speculation about why one of Connecticut's wealthiest men was spending his afternoons in a small-town eatery. Andrea learned about the article when her phone started ringing at 5 a.m. Her brother Ryan's voice was tense. "Turn on Channel 8 News. Now." She fumbled with her ancient TV, nearly dropping her coffee when she saw her diner's facade splashed across the screen. The reporter's voice was almost gleeful. "Sources say Richmond has been spotted numerous times at this local establishment, sparking rumors of both a business acquisition and a personal interest in the owner, Andrea Harrison." "I'm going to kill him," Andrea muttered, already imagining Maxwell orchestrating this for publicity. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Maxwell, I'm so sorry. This wasn't me. My PR team is trying to contain it." Another buzz. "Don't watch the news. And maybe don't open the diner today." Andrea straightened her spine, typing back, "The diner opens at 6 a.m. every day, no exceptions." When she arrived at work 20 minutes later, there were already 3 news vans parked outside. She ignored them, unlocking the door with steady hands. Margie slipped in behind her, looking worried. "I called in reinforcements," Margie said. "Your brother's bringing some off-duty firefighters to help manage the crowd, and half the town's already called to say they're coming in to support you." Andrea's throat tightened with emotion. Before she could respond, her phone rang again. This time it was Pine Valley Care Center. Her grandmother was agitated, asking for her. The news had reached even there. "Go," Margie said firmly. "We've got this." Andrea was halfway to her car when a sleek black SUV pulled up. Maxwell jumped out, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. His usual perfect appearance was rumpled, like he'd been up all night. "Andrea, wait." He reached for her arm, then thought better of it. "Let me explain. I have to get to my grandmother," she said, but she didn't move away. "She's upset." "I know. I just got a call from the facility. I've arranged for a private entrance away from any press, and there's a car waiting to take you there." He ran a hand through his hair. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. I've spent years keeping my private life out of the media, but someone at my company leaked the story." Andrea studied him. The genuine distress in his expression made her anger fade slightly. "Why would they do that?" "Because I've been distracted lately, missing meetings, rescheduling calls." A hint of his usual smile appeared. "Apparently, some board members did their own research when I started spending my afternoons eating meatloaf in Millbrook." Despite herself, Andrea felt a laugh bubble up. "You still haven't actually eaten the meatloaf?" "Today's the day," he said seriously. "If we survive the media circus." A commotion from the diner caught their attention. Through the windows, they could see the morning regulars arriving, forming a human barrier between the news vans and the entrance. Old Mr. Peterson was giving what appeared to be a very colorful interview about minding one's own business. The teenage girl who studied there every afternoon was passing out handmade signs that read, "Leave our diner alone? Your community protects its own," Maxwell observed quietly. "They're your people too now," Andrea said, surprising herself with the words. "You've been here every day for weeks. Mrs. Peterson calls you, that nice young man who always holds the door." Maxwell's expression softened in a way that made Andrea's heart skip. "Come on, let's get you to your grandmother. Then we'll deal with this together." The drive to Pine Valley was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Andrea found herself stealing glances at Maxwell's profile as he made calls, efficiently managing the crisis. He really hadn't planned this, she realized. In fact, he looked more rattled by the publicity than she felt. At the care facility, Maxwell waited in the car, giving her privacy with her grandmother. Gloria Harrison was sitting in her favorite chair, clutching a newspaper. "Is this your young man?" she asked as Andrea entered, her voice clearer than it had been in weeks. She was pointing to Maxwell's photo in the article. "It's complicated, Graham. Love always is, dear." Gloria smiled, a flash of her old self shining through. "But that's what makes it worth fighting for." Andrea sat with her grandmother for an hour, telling her stories about the diner, about Maxwell's daily visits, about how he'd never actually tried the meatloaf. Gloria drifted in and out of clarity, but she held onto Andrea's hand the whole time. When Andrea returned to the car, Maxwell was still on the phone. "No, absolutely not. No press conference, No statements? This is a private matter. He paused, listening. I don't care about the stock price. Some things are more important. He hung up, turning to her with worried eyes. How is she? Better than I expected. She wants to meet you. Maxwell's face lit up. Really? Don't look so pleased with yourself. But Andrea was smiling too. We should get back to the diner. Andrea? Maxwell hesitated. There's something else you should know. That partnership proposal I showed you, the board wants to vote on it today. With all this publicity, they're pushing for a decision. Andrea felt her chest tighten. And if I say no? Then I'll respect that, but I hope you'll say yes. He reached over, taking her hand. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Not because of the headlines, not because of the money, but because I think we could build something extraordinary together. The warmth of his hand around hers felt right in a way Andrea wasn't ready to examine too closely. Let's survive today first. Then we'll talk about building something. As they drove back to Millbrook, Andrea's phone buzzed with messages of support from what seemed like everyone in town. But the one that caught her eye was from Margie. The lunch rush is insane. Also, I saved him some meatloaf. It's time. Andrea looked over at Maxwell, who was still holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ready to face the music? With you? He smiled. The kind of smile that made those headlines almost worth it. Always. The scene at Joe's diner defied every expectation. Instead of chaos, Maxwell and Andrea found a bustling but orderly lunch service. Ryan's firefighter friends were managing the door, politely but firmly turning away anyone with a press badge. Inside, every booth was filled with locals, many wearing hastily made "We stand with Joe's" buttons. Your meatloaf's getting cold, Margie announced, gesturing to a quiet corner booth partially hidden by a strategic arrangement of potted plants. I've been guarding it with my life. Maxwell slid into the booth, watching as Andrea tied on her apron. You don't have to work right now, he said softly. We could go somewhere quiet, talk about everything that's happening. This is exactly where I need to be. Andrea's voice held certainty. My customers didn't abandon me. I won't abandon them. As if to prove her point, the teenage girl, Maxwell had learned her name was Lily, approached their booth. Mr. Richmond, I made you something. She thrust a slightly crumpled paper into his hands before hurrying away. It was a sketch of him and Andrea at the diner counter, drawn with remarkable skill. In Lily's rendering, they were both laughing, surrounded by the warm glow of the diner's vintage lights. At the bottom, she'd written, "Thank you for seeing what we all see in her." Maxwell carefully tucked the drawing into his jacket pocket, suddenly very aware of how much was at stake here. Not just for him and Andrea, but for an entire community that had woven itself around this place in the woman who ran it. His phone buzzed. The board vote was in 15 minutes. He needed to join the video call, needed to defend his vision for this partnership. But first, he picked up his fork and took a bite of the famous meatloaf. The flavors hit him all at once. Savory, complex, with a hint of something he couldn't quite identify. More than that, he tasted the care that went into it, the legacy of a recipe passed down through generations of Harrisons. Andrea appeared at his elbow. Well, I understand now, he said simply, why this place matters so much. It's not just food, it's history, memory, love. Something in her expression shifted, softened. The secret ingredient is maple syrup, she said quietly. My grandfather's addition, he said everything's better with a little sweetness. Before Maxwell could respond, his phone buzzed again. The board was waiting. Go, Andrea said. Do what you need to do. I'll be here. He found a quiet spot in the diner's small office, surrounded by decades of receipts and photographs. The board meeting was tense, voices raised as his vision for the partnership was debated. This is a departure from our core business, one board member argued. The publicity is one thing, but investing millions in a small-town diner's community programs? Our core business is sustainable solutions, Maxwell countered, thinking of Lily's drawing. This is sustainability at its most fundamental level, supporting communities, creating networks of care and support. The technology we build, this is what it's for. The vote was close, too close. When Maxwell emerged from the office 45 minutes later, his expression was unreadable. The lunch rush had died down, but the diner was far from empty. He found Andrea at the counter, teaching Lily how to make the perfect milkshake. The scene struck him with its simple beauty, the patient instruction, the girl's proud smile when she got it right. "Andrea?" His voice was rough. "Can we talk?" They stepped into the back hallway, away from curious eyes. Andrea's hands were twisting her apron. "Just tell me." "The board voted yes," Maxwell said, "with conditions. They want quarterly reviews, metrics for success, proof that this model can work beyond Millbrook." Andrea's breath caught. "And if it doesn't work? Then I'll fund it myself." The words came without hesitation. "I believe in this. In you. In what we could build together." Max. She rarely used his shortened name. It felt intimate in the narrow hallway. "This isn't just about the diner anymore, is it?" It never was. The moments stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Andrea's grandmother's nurse called. Another episode. This time, Gloria was convinced she needed to get to her wedding. Her first wedding, 50 years ago, at the diner. "Go," Maxwell said before Andrea could speak. "I'll handle things here." But Andrea didn't move. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed the nursing home. "Put me on speaker with her." A pause. "Graham, listen to me. You're right, there is going to be a wedding at the diner. But not today. Today, you need to rest. Because when it happens, I want you there. Really there." Maxwell's heart started again. After she hung up, Andrea wouldn't meet his eyes. "That wasn't. I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." Maxwell stepped closer, finally allowing himself to touch her face, to trace the curve of her cheek. "And so did I. From the first moment I walked in here, and you didn't look up from your coffee pot." "This is crazy," Andrea whispered. "The media, the board, are completely different worlds. Different worlds, same values." Maxwell's thumb brushed her chin. "You see people, really see them, help them. That's all I've ever wanted to do with my resources, my technology. We're not so different." A crash from the kitchen broke the moment. Margie's voice called out, "Everything's fine, totally fine. Don't come in here." Andrea laughed, pressing her forehead against Maxwell's chest for just a moment. "I should." "Yeah." But neither of them moved. Finally, Andrea stepped back, straightening her apron. "The board meeting? What else did they say?" "They want to meet you. The woman who got Maxwell Richmond to eat meatloaf. And I told them they'll have to come to Millbrook, to the diner, see what we're building for themselves." Andrea's smile was worth every difficult question, every raised eyebrow, every drop in stock price. "I'll make sure we're serving meatloaf that day." As they walked back into the main dining room, Maxwell noticed something had changed. The regulars were still there. The reporters still lurked outside. But the air felt lighter, like everyone could finally see what he'd known all along. That sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with grand gestures or fairy tale meetings, but with a coffee pot, a generous heart, and the courage to see beyond surfaces to what really matters. And maybe, just maybe, a slice of meatloaf. The morning Gloria Harrison was scheduled to move to Sunrise Haven Memory Care Center. Andrea arrived to find Maxwell already at Pine Valley, handling paperwork with the kind of quiet efficiency that made complex things look simple. "You didn't have to come," she said, though her relief was evident. "Yes, I did." He didn't look up from the forms. "Besides, I promised your grandmother I'd try her secret pancake recipe once she's settled in the new place." Andrea froze. "When did you promise her that?" "Yesterday." Now he did look up, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "I've been visiting her during my lunch breaks. She has strong opinions about my coffee drinking technique." The revelation hit Andrea hard. Not just that he'd been visiting Gloria, but that he'd done it without telling her, without using it to prove anything, just because he cared. "Andrea?" Gloria's voice came from her room, stronger than usual. "Is that my future son-in-law I hear?" Maxwell's pen stilled on the paper. They hadn't discussed marriage, not really, despite Andrea's impulsive words to her grandmother last week. The media speculation was bad enough without adding that particular fuel to the fire. "I'm here, Mrs. Harrison," Maxwell called back, his voice warm. "Ready for your big move?" Gloria appeared in the doorway, more put together than she'd been in months. Someone, probably Maxwell, had arranged for a hairdresser to visit. Her silver hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a new blue dress that brought out her eyes. "You look beautiful, Graham," Andrea managed, fighting back tears. "Of course I do. Can't have those society photographers catching me looking shabby." Gloria winked at Maxwell. "I read all about you, you know. Even on my bad days, I remember the important things. Like how you look at my granddaughter when you think no one's watching." Graham. But Andrea was laughing, even as Maxwell turned an interesting shade of red. The move itself went smoothly, thanks to Maxwell's meticulous planning. Sunrise Haven was everything Pine Valley wasn't: spacious, state-of-the-art, with gardens designed specifically for memory care patients. The cost was astronomical, but when Andrea had tried to protest, Maxwell had simply shown her the facility's employment statistics. Over 80% of their staff were single parents or caregivers themselves, paid well above industry standard with full benefits. "It's not charity," he'd said quietly. "It's investing in the same values you live by every day at the diner, creating circles of care that ripple outward." Now, as they settled Gloria into her new suite, Andrea watched Maxwell arrange her photographs exactly as they'd been at Pine Valley, consulting a picture he'd taken on his phone to get it right. Her chest ached with something that felt dangerously like love. "The board arrives tomorrow," he said later, as they walked through the facility's garden. "Are you ready?" Is anyone ever ready to have their life's work evaluated by billionaires? They're just people, Andrea. People who eat breakfast and worry about their kids, and sometimes feel lost in big moments. He squeezed her hand. "Besides, they should be the nervous ones. You're the one with the magic meatloaf recipe." A commotion near the entrance caught their attention. Camera flashes. Somehow, the press had found them. "I'll handle it," Maxwell said, already pulling out his phone, but Andrea stopped him. "No, we'll handle it together." She straightened her shoulders. "They want a story? Let's give them one worth telling." They walked toward the press together, hands linked. The questions came rapid fire. "Mr. Richmond, is this a publicity stunt?" "Ms. Harrison, what attracted you to one of America's wealthiest men? Is there truth to the rumors about a secret engagement?" Andrea felt Maxwell tense beside her, but she spoke first. "You want to know what attracted me to Maxwell Richmond? Watch this." She led them back inside, where Maxwell had spent the morning helping an elderly resident fix his tablet so he could video chat with his grandchildren, where he'd sat with a former engineer who loved talking about renewable energy, where he'd learned every staff member's name and story. "This is who he is," Andrea said to the gathered reporters. "Not the billionaire in your headlines, but a man who sees people, really sees them, just like he saw me, and my diner, and my community." Maxwell's hand tightened around hers. One reporter, younger than the others, stepped forward. "And the engagement rumors?" "The only thing we're engaged in right now is building something meaningful," Maxwell said firmly. "Something that honors the legacy of people like Gloria Harrison, who taught her granddaughter that a simple diner could be the heart of a community. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a board meeting to prepare for." Later, after the press had gone and Gloria was settled in for her first night at Sunrise Haven, they sat in Maxwell's car in the parking lot, neither ready to end the day. "Did you mean what you said?" Maxwell asked quietly. "About building something meaningful?" Andrea turned to face him. "You know what my grandfather used to say about the diner? That every plate of food was a chance to feed someone's spirit, not just their body. That's what you do with your technology, isn't it? Try to nourish the world in your own way." "Andrea," Maxwell's voice was rough, "I know it's too soon. I know the timing is all wrong with the media attention in the board meeting, but I'm falling in love with you. Not just with what we could build together, but with you. Your strength, your heart, the way you see the world." The words hung between them, heavy with truth and possibility. Andrea thought about her grandmother's new room, arranged with such care, about quiet lunch break visits she hadn't known about a man who could buy anything but chose instead to earn everything that mattered. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "It's exactly right." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, Like breakfast rush coffee and evening quiet. Like possibility and promise, and everything her grandfather had meant about feeding spirits. Tomorrow would bring the board meeting, more press, the constant challenge of merging their worlds. But right now, in this moment, Andrea Harrison finally understood what true wealth looked like. It looked like this: a kiss in a parking lot, a grandmother's new beginning, and a love story that had started with meatloaf but was really about seeing and being seen for exactly who you are. The morning of the board meeting dawned with unexpected grace. Joe's Diner had been transformed overnight, not into something sleek and corporate, but into the finest version of itself. Fresh flowers from Mrs. Peterson's garden brightened every table. The chrome fixtures gleamed. The regulars had voluntarily rearranged their schedules, understanding the importance of this day. "They're early," Margie announced, peeking through the blinds at 7:45 a.m. 3 black SUVs just pulled up. Andrea stood at the counter, wearing her usual work clothes, but with her grandfather's gold watch, his most prized possession, on her wrist. Maxwell had offered to have her meet the board at his office in Hartford, but she'd been firm. If they wanted to understand this partnership, they needed to see the diner in action. The board members filed in, 11 people in expensive suits who looked distinctly out of place among the vinyl booths. Leading them was Patricia Chun, the board chair, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "Welcome to Joe's," Andrea said, stepping forward. "Coffee?" She could see them taking in her work attire, the simple setting, the way regular customers nodded hello without fanfare. Maxwell stood slightly apart, watching. This was her moment. "Before we begin the formal presentation," Andrea continued, moving behind the counter, "I'd like you to experience a normal morning here." For the next hour, she ran the diner exactly as she always did. The board members watched as she served breakfast to Tom Willis, a construction worker who'd lost his wife to cancer last year. They observed her quiet conversation with him about his daughter's college applications, saw her slip an extra muffin into his lunch bag for Sophie's study session. They witnessed her handle a minor crisis when a young mother's credit card was declined, smoothly adding the meal to her running tab while preserving the woman's dignity. They watched Lily arrive early to study, saw how Andrea arranged for her breakfast without being asked. Maxwell's voice was quiet but carried across the diner. "This is what sustainable community investment looks like. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet, but real human impact, multiplied daily." Patricia Chan set down her coffee cup. "Impressive theater, Mr. Richmond, but emotion doesn't pay bills. Miss Harrison, would you walk us through your financial projections?" Andrea pulled out a worn leather ledger. "For grandfathers? Actually, I'd like to show you something first." She opened it to a marked page. "This is from 1985. My grandfather gave a man named Michael Chun 3 months of free meals when he lost his job. 6 months later, Mr. Chun had started his own business and became one of our most loyal customers." Patricia's expression flickered. "Michael Chun was my father." "I know," Andrea said gently. "He told me this story every Sunday for years, until he passed, about how a simple diner helped him keep his dignity during the hardest time of his life. How that gave him the strength to build something new." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Maxwell stepped forward, pulling up financial projections on tablets he distributed to the board. "The numbers you're looking for? They're here. But they're not just numbers. Each percentage point represents lives changed, communities strengthened, dignity preserved. Like your clean energy initiatives," Andrea added, surprising Maxwell. "I've been researching your company. You don't just sell solar panels and batteries. You create systems that make sustainable living accessible to communities that couldn't otherwise afford it. That's what we want to do here, just on a more intimate scale." Patricia Chen stood, walking slowly around the diner. She paused at the wall of photos, decades of community history preserved in fading snapshots. Her finger traced one image, a much younger Michael Chen, smiling broadly, holding up his business's first dollar bill. "The rental space next door," she said finally. "It's empty?" "Yes," Andrea confirmed. "Convert it. Make it a proper community center. Job training, financial literacy classes, whatever this town needs." Patricia turned to face them. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Show me a plan for expansion that doesn't lose the heart of what makes this place work." The next 2 hours were a blur of real discussion, not just numbers and projections, but genuine exploration of how to scale community impact without losing authenticity. The board members ate lunch with regular customers, asked questions, observed the complex dance of relationships that made Joe's Diner more than just a restaurant. By mid-afternoon, when the formal vote was taken, it felt almost anticlimactic. The partnership was approved unanimously. As the board members filed out, Patricia Chen lingered. "Ms. Harrison, that story about my father, thank you for preserving that memory. And Mr. Richmond?" Her stern expression softened slightly. "I owe you an apology. When this first came up, I thought..." She gestured between them. "I thought this was about something else, something less substantive." "It is about something else too," Maxwell said quietly, taking Andrea's hand, "but that doesn't make it less substantive." After everyone had gone, Andrea and Maxwell sat in their usual booth, sharing a piece of apple pie. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the gold of her grandfather's watch. "I have a confession," Maxwell said suddenly. "I knew about Michael Chen, about what he meant to this place. That's why I pushed for Patricia Chen as board chair when I took over the company last year." Andrea stared at him. "You planned this? All of it?" "Not all of it. Not you." His smile was soft. "You I couldn't have planned for if I'd tried for 100 years. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A photo from the nurse at Sunrise Haven. Gloria was in the garden, teaching another resident how to make paper flowers, looking more present than she had in months. "See?" Maxwell nodded at the photo. "Some things you can't plan. You can only be ready when they come along. Be brave enough to say yes to something extraordinary." Andrea looked around her diner. Her grandfather's diner. That was about to become something bigger than she'd ever dreamed, while somehow staying exactly what it had always been. A place where people found what they needed, whether that was a hot meal, a kind word, or, sometimes, unexpectedly, love. "Yes," she said simply, and watched Maxwell's eyes light up with understanding that she was answering more than just his observation about planning. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Inside Joe's Diner, the future was unfolding like a flower, petal by petal, each one a promise of something both old and new, both simple and profound, just like love itself. 1 year later, Joe's Diner hummed with anticipation in the pre-dawn quiet. Andrea stood in the kitchen, running her fingers over the worn edges of her grandfather's recipe book. The pages were soft with age and use, spattered with decades of cooking evidence, each stain a memory. "You're here early," Maxwell said from the doorway. He'd learned to move quietly in the morning stillness, respecting the sacred space between night and day when Andrea did her best thinking. "Couldn't sleep?" She smiled at him, taking in his casual appearance, jeans and a soft sweater, so different from the suit he'd worn when he first walked into her diner. "Ready for today?" The community center next door, now named the Harrison Center, was opening officially this morning. What had started as a simple partnership had grown into something neither of them had fully imagined. A hub for job training, financial education, childcare, and senior programs. The diner remained the heart of it all, unchanged in its essence, but expanded in its reach. "Gloria's already there, directing the flower arrangements," Maxwell reported, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She insisted the colors had to be perfect for the photos. Andrea leaned back against him, thinking about how far they'd come. Her grandmother had good days and bad days still, but more of the former now. The staff at Sunrise Haven had become like family, and Gloria had become something of a local celebrity, teaching cooking classes when she was lucid and sharing stories that the other residents loved to hear. "Did you check on Lily's surprise?" Andrea asked. "All set." The scholarship committee approved it unanimously. Maxwell pressed a kiss to her temple. "She's going to Yale on a full ride, with a guaranteed internship at Richmond Technology's Green Energy Division after her freshman year. Though something tells me she'll end up running this place instead." Andrea turned in his arms, remembering the shy teenager who used to hide in the corner booth. Now Lily helped run the center's youth programs, showing other kids that their dreams were worth pursuing. "We should start setting up," she said reluctantly. "The camera crews will be here soon." The media attention hadn't fully died down, but it had transformed. Instead of gossip about their relationship, the stories now focused on their innovative approach to community development. Other cities had started reaching out, wanting to replicate their model. They worked in comfortable silence, preparing for the day ahead. Andrea mixed her grandfather's special meatloaf, the recipe that had started it all. Maxwell handled the coffee, having finally mastered the ancient machine that had once baffled him. "Remember the first time you tried to use this?" Andrea teased. "I prefer to remember the first time I tried your meatloaf," he countered. "The moment I knew I was going to marry you." The word hung in the air between them, warm and full of promise. They hadn't talked about marriage, not directly, both content to let their partnership grow naturally in all its forms. The bell above the door chimed. Margie walked in, carrying a stack of fresh tablecloths. "The news vans are starting to arrive, and Gloria's asking for both of you." They found Gloria in the community center, arranging flowers with precise determination. She looked up as they entered, her eyes clear and bright. "Good you're here." She gestured them closer. "I've been thinking about your grandfather, Andrea, about the day he opened this diner. He said something to me that morning that I've never forgotten. Gloria, sometimes love isn't just about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about making the same choice every day, to show up, to care, to feed people's souls as well as their bodies." Andrea felt tears prick her eyes. These moments of perfect clarity from her grandmother were precious gifts. "He'd be so proud," Gloria continued, "not just of the diner, but of how you found someone who understands what it really means to feed a community." Maxwell's hand found Andrea's, squeezing gently. Before either of them could respond, Gloria pulled something from her pocket, a small, worn velvet box. "Your grandfather gave me this ring in that diner," she said, pressing it into Maxwell's free hand. "I've been waiting for the right moment to pass it on. I think today's the day, don't you?" Andrea's breath caught. Maxwell stared at the box, then at her, his eyes full of questions and answers all at once. "I had a whole plan," he admitted softly. "Was going to wait until after the opening, make it perfect." "This is perfect," Andrea whispered. And it was. As the sun rose over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of promise, Maxwell Richmond got down on one knee in the middle of their growing dream. Around them, the community they built together was waking up, the diner starting its morning routine, the center preparing for its first official day, their future unfurling before them like a well-loved recipe, familiar and exciting all at once. "Andrea Harrison," Maxwell said, holding up her grandmother's ring, "will you marry me? Not just because of what we've built or what we could build, but because every morning I want to wake up and choose this. Choose you, choose us, choose this beautiful life we're creating together." Andrea looked at the ring that held so much history, at her grandmother's radiant smile, at the man who had walked into her diner looking for an investment and found a home instead. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "1,000 times yes." Later that morning, as cameras rolled and speeches were made about community development and sustainable growth, Andrea and Maxwell stood slightly apart from the crowd, her grandmother's ring catching the light on Andrea's finger. The diner was packed, the center was buzzing with activity, and their extended family, blood and chosen, filled every corner of their expanded world. "You know what this means?" Maxwell murmured in her ear. "You stuck with me as a taste tester for life." Andrea laughed, thinking of all the meals ahead, all the mornings and evenings, all the quiet moments and celebrations they would share. "I think I can live with that." In the diner's kitchen, her grandfather's recipe book lay open to the meatloaf page, the margins filled with notes in different hands, his precise script, her grandmother's flowing cursive, her own neat additions. And now, there was a new note in Maxwell's strong handwriting. "The secret ingredient isn't maple syrup. It's love." It wasn't the kind of love story people expected from a billionaire tech CEO and a small-town diner owner. It was better. It was real. It was built on shared values, daily choices, and the understanding that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch, the communities you build, and the love you choose to nurture, day after day, meal after meal, moment by moment. As the morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across their joined hands, Andrea and Maxwell stood at the threshold of their future, ready to write the next chapter of their story together. It would be a story about love, yes, but also about faith, community, and the kind of wealth that grows not from what you have, but from what you give. And it all started with a plate of meatloaf.